Yeah, welcome. My name is Markus Breunig. I'm a professor at the Hochschule Rosenheim in Information Systems, Wirtschaftsinformatik, for the ones who speak German, with a research background in databases and data mining and an industry background in product management.
Yeah, that's where we actually joined about 10 years ago at a company called Siemens. We started to work on some product management issues together, and I've got originally a social sciences background, worked 25 years in the industry with American companies, as you might find. And we've actually started to look at some of the innovation issues around big data together. And this is how we started to get into the subject of this talk. Because when we sat together on a very cold summer day last summer, we actually found that when you look at big data in the industry, it's often looked like, it's a dividing rod. You take a lot of data and all of a sudden, woof, hey, here is innovation. And this is great because, nobody really knows what big data is. And that's actually the second premise that we ran into starting to work on this talk. Big data is looked at something like Dan Ariely, who is a behavioral scientist, behavioral economist and psychologist, used to be at the MIT, is now at Duke. Put it, and he basically said, big data for most of society is like teenage sex. Everybody's talking about it, nobody knows anything about it for real. It's actually quite interesting because Dan Ariely has also written a book. It's called Predictably Irrational. And the interesting thing is that big data actually helps us to take some of these economic processes that seem totally irrational to us. So all these old school economic models are basically Excel's, what if then else, right? It doesn't work that way. He actually shows in this book that a lot of decisions that humans make look irrational to us in the first place. And big data actually can access some of these things. And that's, so what we wanted to talk about a little bit in this talk, how innovation can be structured, these seemingly irrational things around innovation can be structured with the help of big data in a structured fashion. So I'll leave the next slides to Markus.
So what I wanted to start with now is change the perspective on big data a little bit in the first slides before we go into a more structured approach on how to use big data to drive innovations. And the change of perspective, we've seen this side a lot today. The 3V, 4V, 5V, pick how many V's you like. This is big data from a technical perspective. I think from the questions I've heard so far and from the talks we've seen so far, what I'm going to make explicit now is something that you already know. What is small data from a business perspective? You have your customer and he comes into your shop and he buys a t-shirt, very nice t-shirt. And about a week later he comes back and returns the t-shirt. Now that's small data. He bought the t-shirt, he returned it. What's big data from a business perspective is if you add in more information. You add in, that before he actually came to buy the t-shirt, he was in your store 3 times and he was walking around, he was looking at different aisles, he was looking a long time at this t-shirt already. He was also looking at a nice dress shirt, which was in a different aisle. You also have external data. You may know that the temperature dropped about here. You may know that there is a big outdoor jazz festival happening here. And what you also may know that about after he returned the t-shirt, he spent the next 2 hours going around in the same area, which is a shopping area, going to different stores, and then 2 hours later he came back here and he bought a nice dress shirt. Now, what has big data given you? If you know all of that, it paints a much more complete picture of what was going on that you didn't have before. And we think from a business perspective, that's the real difference between small data and big data. It's not so much about the technical differences. These are very important because you need to know them to handle the data afterwards and to analyze it. But if you want to look at what you're actually going to do with this data, this perspective, data before, data in between the small data things, data that's outside and maybe afterwards, is what's really driving the value behind that. And that's the basic of this talk, and what we want to do now is discuss a very structured approach on how to find levers to use this data to drive innovations.
Right, and for that we actually need to look at two things up front, because we think actually that innovation is not as unstructured. In particular, disruptive innovations don't come out of the blue usually. But there's a lot of interesting tales and stories about innovation, but in reality it's a lot more structured than we think when we just look at it at face value. So the first thing that I'd like you to consider is a view of innovation, creativity, and structured creative processes as actually two sets of pointed brackets. Because what usually happens is, okay, so I start out with some question, so whatever that question might be. And then I'm trying to figure out, some ways how to solve that question. And what it actually does is, so if you're doing it in a reasonably structured way, so you look at lots of different ways of how to phrase that question. Is that the right question? Is that the right question to ask from the data? And what you're doing is, so you converge on a hypothesis that you're trying to solve. And then you go out again, so here's what we think the problem is. Here's a lot of possibilities in how to solve this problem, or how to glean something out of your data. And the next step then is, okay, so when I look at, so all the ways and technologies I can apply to use these data, so I'm trying to break that down to something that's probably in the end economically manageable. And so actually big data projects are very much like most of our creative processes. You just start out with exploring the opportunity space, trying to work with business owners, what's going on here, so what's the problem, what are we trying to solve? And then you actually, so look at some of the data, you converge on some hypotheses, and then you try and start and model and test them. And once you understood what's going on, so you develop options for modeling, obviously, so making those, opening up those brackets again, and then you find out what works. Juan probably has a lot of these issues, Ari is probably giving him a great time, so working with these brackets. And then you refine the models in the end. And you start to go productive with them, you go live, and that's basically how big data works. And it actually works from scientific hypotheses that you're fundamentally trying to solve the same way to stuff that is as fancy as design thinking. Now the other thing is, innovation as such isn't as unstructured as we think. Everybody's talking about disruptive innovation. 60% of CEOs in Europe want to invest more in disruptive innovation. Most of them surely don't have really looked at what disruptive innovation is. And as a matter of fact, if you look at it, innovation probably is very much a continuum from something very incremental to, hey, what we're all after, disruptive. And so Markus and me came down to, and obviously, so incremental innovation gives you only so much. So it's not a lot of risk. You basically take your product line, you extend it, exchange steel for carbon or whatever you do, and you pretty much know what you're doing. And disruptive innovation is actually you're trying to transform the business model. Okay, I'm an old school retailer, selling shirts, and so I want to do something totally different. I want to sell a shirt experience, so you can bring that shirt back if the weather is different. So maybe it's a completely different business model. Obviously, so what we can reach with this business model, a new business model, is exponential in terms of growth, results, whatever. But it also bears exponential risk if you're not a startup company, because if you try to do this in a large company, it's going to be rather disruptive as well to some of the processes, as some of you already pointed out. So what we've done is we've basically broken down these innovations in three sort of manageable different categories. It's actually not our invention. It's a bunch of guys who wrote a book in 1999 on innovation. It's guys called Bagai, Covey and White, who basically suggested, so breaking this down into sort of three different manageable types of innovation, because we can't deal with the continuum in a meaningful way. So management objectives are obviously different from data-driven decision making. If you want to do incremental stuff, okay, should we, so does steel last? Should I move to carbon? To, hey, what's my business completely different? How can I transform my old shirt-selling business where I don't know what the guy's buying, why, and when, into a business that's completely different, bringing me completely different returns in a world where consumers are running out there with lots of information, so I've checked everything and Google and whatnot. And in the middle there is something that we call adjacent. That is actually taking your current business model maybe to a different industry, or taking your current technology into a different industry, trying a slightly different business model. So this is what we're trying to look at in terms of how to apply big data to these three different models. And Markus is going to continue for the next.
So what's very clear from that is that we need different approaches for these three different phases. And I want to go briefly through the first two phases now, and then Godehard is going to probably through the last of these three phases, and show you some techniques, some approaches to find innovations in each of these. And as you can see, very, very different. The first one is actually very simple. Only one slide, even though we have till 2 o'clock, I think, so I don't do that in much detail, but I'm not going to. It's very simple. First step is you look at the current reports that your company is using, you look at the numbers that are in there, and you see if you can improve the quality using larger amounts of numbers. I think that's a very low-hanging fruit, very simple to start with. Second step is, once you hear it, it's also very clear, I guess. You look at the reports and say, well, what are people really asking of these reports? Are they asking for this number, or are they asking for a certain insight? And can I maybe find a different number now with more data that is better to gain this insight than the old number I had before? That's the second step. And the third step then finally is to ask why. Why are people asking for these numbers? What do they want to do with them? What business initiatives do they want to start with? And then look into the data you have now and see how you can support these other business initiatives. So this is pretty much straightforward once you start thinking about it, which means it's probably a good way to approach it that way. But the devil is in the details, right? It's not easy to find out how do I get better numbers, which other numbers may make sense, or even how do I support the business initiatives in a better way. We're going to come back to that towards the end of the talk when we talk about what skills you need in your team to achieve that. So this is the low-hanging part for the data-driven decision-making horizon. The second horizon is more interesting, actually, the adjacent. You start changing your business model now, and there's a lot of techniques you can use to do that, which, again, were not invented by us. We just structure that and bring it in a usable form, basically. So what you want to do first is you need to understand your business model in a lot of detail. And one technique that has been proposed for that is business model canvas modeling. I'm going to go into that in the next slide to help you understand that a little bit. Once you understand your business model and how your different parts of your company work together, you can start combing through that to find places where you can innovate. And the comb we're going to use for that is called Dublin's 10 Types of Innovation, or Keely's 10 Types of Innovation, invented by a guy called Keely working for a company called Dublin. I'm going to go to that 2 slides from here. And you're going to use these two in an iterative and incremental way to find places where you can start innovating. So what's this business model, canvas model? It tries to structure your business model using 9 different perspectives. You start with your key partners, your key activities, and your key resources on the left side. These together build your value proposition, which gets transferred to your customer via your channels, via your customer relationships, and also generates a certain cost and a certain revenue. It's really interesting to model your business model with different parts of the company using this canvas. If you take sales guys and marketing guys, you're going to end up sometimes with different customers, definitely with different value propositions. So it's a lot of fun just to do that, and most people, so it's a real eye-opener for a lot of companies if you do that. And once you have done that, you can now see how it all works together. Right? If you start changing one of your key manufacturing partners, that's probably going to have an impact on the quality of your product. Well, that changes your value proposition and probably your customer relationship. higher value or lower value. It doesn't really matter. It's going to change your customer relationship. It will also change your cost. And via the change customer relationship and value proposition, maybe the revenue you can generate from that. So wherever you start changing a little bit, where you start turning little knobs in there, it's going to have profound impacts probably on your whole business model. Which sounds very complex, but it's actually great. Because when you understand it, it's great. If you don't understand it, it's horrible. But if you understand it, it's great. Because it gives you the option to turn different knobs in any of these areas to innovate. Now, how do you know where to turn the knobs, which knobs you can turn? And yeah, you could just sit down and brainstorm maybe. But again, we want to do structured innovation. So we found these 10 types of innovation by Keeley. What they did is they looked at 3,000 companies and how they innovated. And they looked at all the innovations they found and structured them into 10 different kinds of innovation. What you probably think of first is always product performance. That's like the innovation tactic. You improve your product, you make a better product, an innovative product. But that's only one of these 10 types. And it's actually quite often the one you don't really want to do so much because that gets copied very quickly, very, very quickly. But there's a lot of other areas you can innovate in. You can innovate in your profit model, completely different profit models. We've seen examples of that, like the freemium model in the App Store. You can work on your brand, on your channel, on the experience. You can work on the product system, what's around your product to improve that. We always have to bring the example of the Apple iPod, right? If you want to do innovation, it has to be in there. That was not a product performance innovation. It was actually pretty bad MP3 player at that time. There were technically much more advanced MP3 players when Apple launched that. But it contained, I don't know how many? Six different types of innovations in there. Yeah? A product system, you had the application iTunes to get the songs onto your device. You had the store where you could buy them very easily. They had a lot of networks, partners in there. So I don't want to go through all of that, but successful innovations pretty much always combine approaches in multiple of these 10 types of innovation. Now this is still very high level if you want to use that to really find innovations using our canvas. So luckily for us, they did even more work than just structuring this into these 10 types of innovations. They identified 112 innovation tactics within these 10 types of innovation. This is the 10 types again. I'm going to ask you some questions about what's on this slide later on. No, seriously, these are very specific ways how you can innovate in this area. And let's zoom into that a little bit more. This is on the left side of the, oh, you can only see the ones that are, okay, there's more on there. I can see the one.
They're too gray.
Yeah.
The mirror is actually a little bit
light
overwhelmed.
What we did now is we looked at all these innovation tactics and identified the ones that are data-driven. Not necessarily big data-driven, but simply data-driven. And these are the ones that you can still read, like ad support, bundle pricing, franchising, supply chain integration, and so on. And let me go into more details and pick out 3 from different areas of these 10 areas. Feature aggregation, that's product performance. We don't want to look into that so much, so let's use the bundle pricing as an example. That's clearly something that you can drive using more data. You can identify items to bundle using a data analysis. You can use predictive analysis to predict what changes in revenue this bundling will lead to. And you can analyze the results once you've actually done it. So this is clearly something that you can, if you want to do innovation using big data, this is one of the levers you can turn, one of the knobs you can turn to innovate. As I said before, you don't want to use just one, you want to combine multiple ones. So you have like 30 or 40 of the 112 that you can actually use. And now the interesting thing is, how do you combine them using the canvas? How do you predict what's going to happen and what makes sense to combine to find an innovation that fits into your product? So this is what we think from our experience in using research that has been done before, is a good way to approach the second horizon, the horizon for adjacent innovations. You don't radically change your business model, you innovate into an adjacent area.
So the interesting thing is that actually, so we would not recommend that you put 100% of your innovation budget into what I'm going to talk about. I think, again, Juan, sort of almost pointed it out today because, so you can't go for disruptive innovation all, so completely with your full resources. I think it's crazy. Most of the companies that we talk to and that we're trying to advise as a consulting company, so we're trying to teach them what Google does, basically. Put 70% into your existing business, put 20% into adjacent, which gives you a lot of levers, as a matter of fact, and particularly if you approach it as structuredly, as Markus just started to describe it. And obviously, we've developed a lot more detail in that direction. And put 10% of your resources, but a planned 10% into what I'm going to talk about. So disruptive approaches. Because if you have so if you manage a sort of balanced innovation budget, you're probably going to be a lot better than a company that does incremental innovation for 20 years. So look at VW these days. And then all of a sudden you find out something is really blowing up on you, and you should have so spend those 10% on maybe hybrid whatevers, or hydrogen or whatever it is, right? The hard and the challenging part is you don't know what to do in terms of disruptive innovation. But we can help you with how to do it in terms of methodology. And this is where, so I'm going to talk a couple of minutes about it. Because disruptive innovation, again, so we don't know exactly what to do, but, so we actually have a pretty good idea of how to get there. So some of the things, so particularly Silicon Valley has become rather good at is, so use these methods that we're talking about here to really drive innovation in a disruptive fashion. So one thing, so they really do is they start from the customer. The Germans tend to do technology first. Here's great technology, Markus and me know that, so something comes out of Bocholt, and we have to turn it into an innovation for our customers. At Siemens we had that occur quite a couple of times. And so the good idea when you want to do something disruptive, not to start with technology, figure out a customer and his problem. And a good way to do that, as a matter of fact, is start with a customer journey. Now I'll come back to that in a sec because customer journeys have become a lot more interesting since we have big data. Markus kind of pointed it out in the beginning. So the second thing is, okay, once I've got a customer journey, I'm starting to really understand what the hell is going on there, or at least a couple of questions that I can ask myself. Here's a structured way of how to touch unstructured information. That's called design thinking. It's a way of working that's kind of balanced between the analytical and the gut. Let's put it that way. It's been developed between Stanford and IDEO over the past 20 years or so, 25 years or so, almost 30 as a matter of fact, I'm getting old. And it's working quite well. So you can learn it in Germany with us or the Potsdam Institute that has Plattner built. And so what always helps with all these radical approaches is to get really divergent, multifaceted, cross-functional team. We've always believed that, but since the February issue of the IEEE magazine, so there is data to support that. So more cross-functional teams will really help you to get better at innovation, to deliver better stuff for customers. And obviously, you can't do this and plan this out over the so extended period of 4 years or something. It's got to be iterative and incremental. Use methods and ways of working, the hows that we've learned in the software industry, get better at, so finding out what the next hypothesis is, building only until you lose sight of what's going on, build again. But the starting point is, like Markus already pointed it out, the customer journey. Really figure out what is going on with your customer. The good news is as opposed to the classical design thinking where you go out with your ethnographers and ethnologists pad, so all these, take pictures, take films of people, you got data that are beyond that. This is actually a customer journey of somebody renting a rental car. But like Markus described it, it's while this guy is renting or trying to rent a car, he's doing other stuff. So he's looking at other offers. So he's looking at different websites. He's comparing meta search engines like Kayak. And so if you knew all of that stuff, you would have a different offering for him, right? And in particular, if you knew what the question exactly was in the beginning, so is he looking for a cheap car, is he looking for a big car, is he looking for a car only for 6 hours, but he would have to rent it for 24, and all that stuff, okay? So the way that you go forward on that is, like I said, I think this is one of the best methods to approach something as unstructured as, so disruptive. We don't exactly know what we're going to do with a structured process. And the interesting thing is it tries to balance the information that we have analytically, and as well as, that's more the one that feels more like gut feeling. Big data is a lot like that, because you have on one hand cause and effect data that, so stuff that we can analyze analytically, and then there is data that kind of, they just look like they have some effect on each other. And so for that reason, I think this is a very good method to actually work with that, and in itself, it is very iterative, and it comes back very much to what I approached in the beginning with these. So, okay, let's find the right question. So once we have condensed the question, then we can start look at the solutions, and then we can probably find methods how to build this stuff. So fundamentally, what we're saying here is, so we have for 3 horizons, we have decidedly different tools. If we manage 3 different horizons or different models of innovation in a balanced fashion, then we can actually, sort of approach innovation with big data in a reasonably structured fashion. And Markus is going to take that a step further.
So who is going to do that is the question that we should be asking. And clearly we need someone from the business side who knows the questions to answer, who knows what he actually wants to achieve. But he usually doesn't know what's possible. So you also need a data scientist, someone who knows the methodology, what you can do with the data, what questions can be answered by the data, and they need to work together. And then clearly you need someone from the IT side who understands the infrastructure, what you need to manage the data, who understands 3B. So we're going back here to the first slide basically, now trying to bring it all together. I think we've seen a lot about that today already. It's been mentioned a couple of times where someone is located. Again, Juan said he was on the business side, right? Which absolutely makes sense, but you need someone who understands the technical part on the business side to actually drive it. If you're missing one of these 3 aspects, you're not going to be successful. Yeah. And that pretty much concludes our talk. We've gone through these 3 horizons of innovation, different tools in each of them to be successful. Structured approaches available in each of them, not invented by us, but invented by a lot of researchers over time. We think, from our experience, they can be combined very easily and brought together to approach each of these horizons in the best possible way. And as Godehard said, again, it's important, this should be the main investment. That's the low-hanging fruits. This is really where you want to work at first. You want to put some of your effort in here, and you want to put a little bit of effort in here. Even though this sounds so simple, this is still very structured, and this is so open.
As data scientists and guys who are responsible for so working innovation with big data, so I advise you really to go with the 70% approach, because you probably can do a lot already, right? And then you probably get the credibility to do some more of the outliers. And I think, so this is what we recommend as a consulting company always, so to our clients. Don't try to put 60% on disruptive unless you got a lot of money in the bank. And you have nobody to put pressure on, and you don't have like a quarterly result and shareholders and other people to have fun. Yeah, that's us.
Thank you very much. Yeah, if you want to work with us, or some students if you have some ideas that can be evaluated as a student project, don't hesitate. We are a Fachhochschule, so we do pretty much every master's and bachelor's thesis with the company. Or if you want to hire someone, that's also possible. Thank you very much.
We're also making money on this. Questions? Go on.
I have a question, obviously. First of all, thank you very much, because you showed here wonderful way, a very structured way of connecting in business innovation with the other cool stuff. Yeah, kind of the bridging steps. And it's really, really valuable for us. I wish I had it in the past. Let's put it this way. And now my question is, for this design thinking, from the data science perspective, yeah, do you have experiences using something called a Bayesian modeling, so Bayesian modeling, based on the Bayes theory? Because it's about just modeling your gut feelings. It's kind of providing you a prior with your experience into just
Yeah, Bayesian modeling is used a lot in the data mining area. We haven't really combined it with design thinking so far, but it's a very interesting idea. I have to admit.
As a matter of fact, I'd love to do that. You know, so we had a client, you know, so who was looking at it. He was getting a little bit scared away because it involved some personal data. And we actually had to give him a slide, you know, so one-page slide about, you know, so all the legal implications that would do. But if you have something that we could jointly approach, we'd love to.
Definitely, yeah. I think that's an interesting aspect, because from what I see quite often is that people do hard in doing design thinking, doing business canvas and everything, and before they really try to do harder in doing this, they move over to big data and start to do an exploratory analytics, and think that they get the questions they have to ask in the end out of the data. And I think that's exactly what you're showing in here as well, that this always has to have that business foundation as well, that I have to know, okay, what I want to achieve before I can make use of big data.
But you also have to know what you can actually ask. So that's why it's an iterative process. And both parties basically involved in that. But yeah, you need to start with questions coming from the business side. If you don't have an idea what you want to improve, how you want to improve your business model, then just data doesn't make sense.
I think it really is important to understand what your management objective is. If you don't know what you're going after, you're not going to go anywhere. I mean, this is again Alice in Wonderland, right? Yeah, so if you, it's one of these things, you know. So
just need more data.
Exactly, more data. And the real question is, what is the question I'm going to ask? And you know, and that's the problem with, you know, so a lot of people think of design thinking as some fuzzy something method. You know, so if you apply it rigorously as you do at Stanford University or the Hasso-Plattner Institute, it's not some kind of funny design kind of stuff. It's a pretty organized, pretty structured process. And one of the things that you always have to keep in mind, you know, so one of the you know, so core beliefs in design thinking is, you know, so be mindful of process, really know where you are. It's not exploration all the way through. Every phase in design thinking has its own objective. And yes, you may come to the point where you learn that, you know, somewhere later in the process, okay, I didn't put, you know, so quite enough thought into that phase. But then you go back, change your mindset, and work in a different fashion. So this is, you know, and I'm seeing that a lot, and so when we're consulting with companies, and so people really, you know, sort of read this stuff about, you know, so business model canvas and design thinking, and they're applying it in a haphazard way. It's hard learned, and you have to do it a couple of times before it actually yields the results that you want to.
It sounds a lot easier than it is. You notice that every time.
With the students, it's Monday.
Especially the canvas modeling.
Okay, do it.
Canvas looks like, okay, when I saw it the first time a couple of years ago, I thought, okay, this is so obvious, right?
Yeah.
Try to do it with a company.
Yeah.
Okay, 7 people from different departments around, you know, so it's a big poster, and then all of a sudden, you know, no. And the first thing is always, it's extremely superficial. Yeah, so, okay, we have customers. No, you need a canvas for every single customer group, every single target group, and all of a sudden the whole thing starts to become a lot more difficult, a lot more detailed, and then it starts to yield results, because all of a sudden you know where the costs are coming from, how these things are connected, and then you can start driving data through it. Like, you know.
Yeah, what we presented here was very high level, right? We want to do persona modeling, I think it was in one of the slides, which is hard in itself. Again, sounds easy, but it's really hard. To model your customer personas. You definitely want to do that anyway afterwards, because if you're going to do user interface or the user experience design, you need the same techniques basically. You can transfer a lot of that from one part of this effort to another.
I think exactly what you're saying, what one can see from that one is even if it's big data, it's still hard to get the right things in place. So it's not, big data is probably not the key to make things simple.
But for those of you who haven't seen design thinking, it seems you already know a lot about that, right? It doesn't take the creativity out of the process. That's the important thing. It's not, we're doing this process now in step by step by step. Right? That's the diamonds that Godehard showed in the beginning. That's the creative part. That's the process part. That's the creative part. That's the process part. That's the nice thing about it. It makes brainstorming actually worthwhile.
Because you know
you've
what
done
you're
brainstorming.
you know the question that you're asking in the first place.
Yeah.
Or you know that the question is wrong in the end because you don't find a solution,
Yeah.
and then you go back, so back to the process, find out what is going on with the customer. Yeah.
Well, what I can see in a company I work for is pretty interesting, that this iterative process is very, 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 very important. Because at the beginning we always have a question or a use case, and then especially around data, if you get into that topic, suddenly the one who come up with the question, with the use case, realize that there's more behind it, and actually the question and use case shifts 180 degrees in the other direction. And we had that now several times, that when we started looking at the data and tried to make what he wanted, during that process he realized that actually just visualizing what we already have is way more important than doing some analytics. And that's very important to do this iterative thing, because then you run into the wrong direction, or you answer the question in the end, but you miss all the opportunities which have been on the way actually, and you would have been able to pick them up way more easier than doing the how way to.
In order to do that, you need to have good expectation management usually, because a lot of managers come from the area where it's a project and it runs through and then there is a result. And if you're on an iterative process, you need to manage the expectations that yes, we're going to have results. The results may be that something is not working, which is a great result because it means you're not going to spend more effort on it. But you need to manage this expectations, and also that you don't really know how long it's going to take. But I think we're on a good way there, especially in the software area with the agile methods. Right? If you do Scrum, that's very similar. You also have cycles that you go through, and this combines very nicely with a lot of these techniques.
As a matter of fact, design thinking can add a lot to requirements modeling as per the PO role, because so when you start, so if you break it down to really the basic, so PO is a requirements engineer, if you will. But if you, so teach the PO to use design thinking, actually work with the whole team on a solution without going to mob programming or something as far, you're starting to add a lot more value because you're trying to understand the customer for real. And then, so the priorities change and stuff like that. But again, so it is a lot more, and that's the management problem that we've heard a little bit about earlier. It is, oftentimes it is, so managers want to know what we're doing. And I think this whole thing is a little bit more meta. So we know how we're doing it, and we're probably going to come up with better results. But since we know the how quite well, as very much as like with Scrum, so you're starting to get into rituals and processes. Over time, people will understand it's secure, it's safe, we can do it as a business process. But it takes time. And some teaching. I know. I mean, this is
software development. It can be agile, yeah, but the management's not. So.
Sure. No, management is not agile. In many companies, the bigger the company, the less agile, and it actually is a different challenge. Scale agile is maybe some answer. Different story. Good.
We still have like an hour 10.
Don't push it.
Okay, so I'm going to use the hour and 10 minutes now to
Okay, we'll leave the picture.
I just need 1 minute of your time to thank you for your patience, for being here, for discussing, and a very special thanks to our speakers who delivered really great talks, and a special thanks to our organization team consisting of Selma, Diana, and Manu. They did a really great job. So thank you all. And,